Hello everybody, welcome back to Forza Horizon 5 with another showdown. A showdown that's a bit overdue, because when the Nissan Gtr Nismo came out, the 2020 version, I was very excited because we have not had a GTR, a new one, since like 2017? And that meant it was always a bit sluggish in the supercar field, but now that we have the latest and greatest in the GTR lineup, I wanted to give it a shot. And we also had the Noble M600 back in the game. We had a new car, the Ferrari J50, a whole bunch of new cars from the game full stop in launch. So I wanted to give it a go. But right as I'm getting ready to film it, the new update is announced, and it's got the Ats Gt, the 620R, and the Mclaren 765 LT. And there is no way that I will be able to release that video without those three cars, because people will get angry at me. So I waited. And I waited for those cars. I finally got them all. I finally tested the ATS. Everything is done. But there is a wild card. That being the 1971 Porsche 917 Longtail. Because it's in the PI range, it's got a similar amount of power, it's almost half the weight of the GTR Nismo, but it is from 1971, so it's very old. It does not have the same level of grip as these modern cars. And I was curious to see how a classic race car would fare in this field of modern track cars and supercars. And our first test was the standard issue hot lapping challenge, where I have 5 flying laps to get the best possible time with each respected car. Try and get the most fair test, most objective test possible. And I started out with the Ats Gt, a vehicle that is one of the most powerful here, 720 horsepower, all going to the rear wheels with not a whole lot of aerodynamics apart from a small active rear wing. I love this vehicle. It's a bit weird looking, but I kind of like it. And it's always good to see the ATS when it's not that common in other games or in real life for that matter. Not many people know about it. It's also pretty high in the class because of its ridiculous top speed from its lots of horsepower. But its handling, not so much. It's not bad. It's certainly not the worst car of this event by any stretch, but it doesn't have the same turn-in as vehicles like the Aventura Svg, the Italo-designed Zero Uno, or the McLarens. It just is sort of average, with above-average acceleration. But you need handling. I try to pick a track that was as balanced as possible. And it is a pretty handling-focused track. You get up to some decently high speeds. I think the fastest cars are getting to 160-ish. But still, mid-speed and low-speed corners are everywhere on this track. And the ATS was just sort of okay on them, if I can be perfectly honest. And that was the same for this other vehicle, very close to it actually in terms of position. The Ford GT, a vehicle that I have loved since it came out in 2016, well, it's starting to show its age. It is 6 years old now, and it's pretty underpowered. It's not the least powerful vehicle here, but it's nowhere near as powerful as, say, the 488 Pista, or the Aventura, or the ATS, or the 765. It's just underpowered, 645 horsepower, rear-wheel drive, and not the lightest vehicle here by any stretch. So sure, it's a purpose-built Le Mans race. I mean, it won Le Mans first try in its class. But in this competition, considering how old it is kind of struggling. I was surprised because the GT was always able to put up a very good fight, but with the new cars that we have, God, half the vehicles in this list, if not more, are brand spanking new. The GT is just simply outclassed for the first time, which is a shame. I mean, it's good handling, but the steering by comparison feels a bit understeery relative to vehicles we'll see later. Not that it's bad, but it's nowhere near fast enough for the rest of this field. And even the rest of this field is nowhere near fast enough for the winner of the hot lapping, the Mclaren 675 Longtail. I'll be honest, I included this in here for a bit of interest because I was going to include the 720S, but then the 765 came out, and I was like, it's only 12 PI different, might as well show how ludicrously fast the 765 is, and I think I did that very successfully. It's a monster. The acceleration is brutal. Even with rear-wheel drive, the acceleration is simply insane. There are very fast vehicles like the SVJ and the 911 GT2, both Nürburgring lap record holders at some point, and the 765 blows them out of the water into the 18th century. It turns in exceptionally well, despite having the third or fourth most power here. It is surprisingly good on acceleration, on grip, and launching out of the corners, it's not bad. And then combine that with the brutal mid-range acceleration, it just never runs out of go. It's insane. It did a 59.0 second lap around this track. The next fastest was the Aventura Svg at 1 minute 0.7. It was a second faster than the Aventura Svg. Now, I will say, if you exclude 765, it is very close. With the Aventura Svg, again, 1.00.7, then the Porsche 911 GT2 RS in third with 0.8, then the 488 Pista, a 1.3. It's all very, very close. The big surprise for me, though, is the Noble. The Noble is the oldest car here, apart from the Porsche. Came out in 2010. It's 12 years old, and it scored 5th with a 101.4. It's only a tenth of a second off the 488 Pista. That really surprised me. I know the 765, I was expecting that to run away, and it did. But the Noble was the biggest surprise here by far. It really punched above its age and its weight. As for the Mclaren Battle, I included the 600 LT and the 620R because they are just 2 PI points apart despite varying, very different philosophies. And I don't know if I just didn't get the most out of the 620R, or if this track and its sort of mid-range acceleration favored the lighter and more powerful 600. But the 600 was significantly faster, 1.4 seconds faster than the 620R, which is weird because the 620R is like the road legal racing car. I don't understand that, but that is what happens sometimes. And then we have the rest of the field, the GT in 11th, the ATS in 10th, and the poor R8 down in 17th and last. Bit of a surprise, given that it's at least similar specs on paper to the Ital design, but the Ital design was 2 seconds a lap faster, so clearly it did something different. Now, I always like to throw in a bit of a unique test, one that is different for each one that I do. I usually have my standard tests like lap time, speed, zone 0 to 100 and whatnot, but I always try to have at least one unique one. Last time it was the tire management for the classic supercars. This time I'm going up on the Goodwood Festival of Speed. Yeah, someone used the event lab to brilliantly create the Goodwood Festival of Speed's hill climb, and I thought, given these cars frequently make appearances at the Goodwood event, why not run them up and see which one is the fastest? Now, this does favor the high-powered cars a lot, because the Goodwood hill climb is very fast with nothing but high-speed corners, but still I thought it would be quite interesting. And yeah, the more powerful vehicles were definitely the favorites. The Aventura and the Pista both over 700 horsepower. It also meant the Corvette C7 ZR1 was actually faster than the Viper ACR. The Viper was almost 2 seconds a lap faster in the lap time, but with the faster straightaway C750 horsepower Corvette was pretty easily able to overpower the Viper ACR, although the ACR was only 0.2 of a second off, despite being 100 horsepower down, because that is the power of aerodynamics, and you will see that come into play later. But in the meantime, we do have to talk about the less powerful vehicles, okay? Vehicles like the Ital design, like the Audi, even like, with a lesser extent, the Huracan Performante, kind of struggle, because, well, they have the grip, but when your other competitors can simply run away on the straightaways, it doesn't matter. The only exception was kind of the Huracan Performante, which was so good handling. It could carry so much speed with its acceleration and all-wheel drive launch, and it's the ALA system. Yeah, that means it could actually carry the speed, and it ended up being just 0.3 of a second slower than its big brother, the Aventura. So that was probably the biggest surprise for me. But, you know, I did see the cars from the previous lap time challenge kind of struggle, especially if they were not as powerful. So the Noble, which finished 5th, was finished in 12th. We had the 911 finish in 6th instead of 3rd. So, really, it upset the order except for the top 3. No surprises here, the 765 LT took another victory by another commanding lead. Again, a second faster than the Aventura, 40.0 versus 41.1. However, the 488 Pista was 0.02 of a second slower. I need to put a caveat to this, and the 0 to 100 to 0 test that will come later. I had to use a stopwatch for this because it's not... The layout of the track doesn't work for the Forza timing. So I had to use a stopwatch. And that means there is a plus or minus 0.0203 second margin between accuracy of the runs, just based on my reaction time, basically. So, for all intents and purposes, the Pista and the Aventura Svg tied. And we'll see that later on. Also, for the C7 ZR1, 0.07 of a second slower than the 911 GT2, which goes to show how fast the GT2 is around the corners, because that has 60 horsepower less than the C7. So, there you go. And then we have the usual ones, the Ford GT again struggling in 16th place, just beating the Ferrari J50, not doing too well. I know there's only 10 of them in the world, but the J50 really did struggle, 41.3. The ATS redeeming its mediocre lap time with the 5th place overall. So I like this test. It shook up the order. The bumps on Goodwood were a real challenge for these cars to deal with. Some cars just could not accelerate or brake as hard as they wanted because they would get upset by the bumps. So I took them onto a public road this time for a speed zone. A moderately technical speed zone through the hills just outside Guanajuato. And this is where the 765 first began to show its signs of frailing. It still was insanely fast, being the only car to have a 100-mile-an-hour average speed. However, the Viper ACR finally had its massive wing come good, just fractionally slower than the 765, 99.6 miles an hour. It's the closest any car has come so far to beating that 765. It put up a good fight, but it wasn't enough. But we do have to talk about a car that actually didn't do very well. I haven't talked about it very much because it's been yet again mediocre. The Nissan Gtr Nismo. I added it. I did this whole challenge because I wanted to see how it fared, but it's just in the same boat that the 2017 was. They took so long to add the 2020 Nissan in that the new cars, the Aventuras and the Performantes and the 765s, have just outclassed it again. So it's way off the pace at 96 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour slower than even the Viper ACR. Which is, again, weird because it's got the same horsepower and the same drivetrain as the Italo design, which did far better. Although it is still only in 10th place, 96.7, but I guess that's because the Italo design, A, has the coolest rear wing on this field, by far, and the Italo design is one of my favorite handling supercars on the market, certainly in the game right now. It's phenomenal to drive. I absolutely love it. It's even better, in my opinion, than the Huracan Performante, which was objectively faster, but I do prefer the Italo design to drive. And this also perfectly lets us illustrate how bad the J50 is. It's rear-wheel drive with a convertible, so it needs extra stiffening, which means more weight, and it has no fancy aero, so it sort of struggled. That's been its common theme so far, 94 miles an hour. It's not the worst, it was better then the Porsche, then the 917, but that is also, you know, 40 years, nearly 50 years newer than the Porsche, so not that much of a thing, I guess. Once again, though, the order is pretty similar. The McLaren 765 in first, what a surprise. This might as well be a Mercedes in Formula 1, at least until, well, the last 2 years. Like, I can't use that joke anymore, damn it, they suck now. Anyway. Porsche, once again, wrapping up a nice consistent third place, but the Viper finally doing good with its massive aero package coming into handy on this bumpy technical circuit, just shy of the 765. Then we have another consistent finish for the Pista in fourth, followed up by the Noble again, outclassing pretty much everything here relative to its age in another fifth position, really punching fantastically above its weight. It was it's easily the best car here in terms of years to performance ratios. I mean, look at the Huracan, the Ital design, the 600 LT. They're all way newer and way more expensive, and yet they're also way slower. I mean, the Noble beat the Aventura Svg, not by much, but it beat it by about half a mile an hour, and that's no small feat. The Aventura, again, was a Nürburgring lap record holder, and the Noble has a Volvo engine. And for our final challenge, we have another one that favors all-wheel drive. I know I try to keep it as balanced as possible, but for 0 to 100 to 0, you don't really have much of a choice. That's going to be favoring high-powered all-wheel drive vehicles like the Aventura, like the Performante, like the GTR in theory. That didn't go so well. It didn't do very well in terms of actually the challenge. I guess it's too heavy, nearly 4,000 pounds, but still. The GTR was an outlier in that. All-wheel drive was incredibly fast. The Ital design, the Huracan, the Aventura, they were all in the top 10. They were fantastic. The Aventura even took it to victory, beating the 765. The 765 did not win a challenge. It won 75% of them, but didn't win the fourth one. It did not win the fourth one, being beaten by the Aventura, being beaten by the Performante, and being beaten by the 917. Yeah, the 917 actually beat the 911 GT too. I guess because this was the one challenge that actually favored it. Lots of power, big tires, very lightweight. So I guess it kind of makes sense, but it is kind of funny to see a car from the 70s beating top-of-the-line hypercars. I mean, it beat the Pista by almost half a second. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And this is another example of very close calls when it comes to finishing positions because, well, the J50 and the Ford GT were separated by 0.01 seconds. Yeah, they're basically tied. Which is probably why the GT struggled so much in its lap times and in the Goodwood test because, well, it doesn't have the pace. The thing that saves it is that it is essentially a Le Mans car for the road, so it can at least handle better than the J50. But in terms of acceleration, they're pretty much the same, and that's not a good thing. Also very close, the Audi R8. All-wheel drive, it should be great, but it has one of the least powerful vehicles here, just 602 horsepower. But again, that doesn't make sense because the Ital design has the same power and the same drivetrain. It's basically the same vehicle underneath, and yet it was half a second faster. I don't understand that. I don't understand why the Audi struggles so much. I know it's a 2018 model, but still, it's not like it's that old. I mean, it beat the Noble, but again, it's 8 years newer than Noble with all-wheel drive. So, whoop-de-doo. Some vehicles did better than others. Again, the McLaren 600 LT besting the 620R. If you actually look at the timetables here, it was a 8:11 versus an 8:21. So again, incredibly close finishes for all of these guys. The Porsche 917 and the Huracan Performante were within 0.02 of a second. So again, lots of virtual ties here, which the only variation between the two of them are how quickly I can hit the stop button on my stopwatch. I try to be as fair as possible, I try to be as quick as possible, but I can only do so much. Really, this was, again, all-wheel drive favoring. The 765 did not win, getting beaten by the Huracan 737 and the Aventura 7 dead. It was the Viper, though, that was the biggest casualty, going from second in the speed zone to last. Way last. Even slower than the C7 ZR1. Vehicles that just couldn't put the power down, so they had the limitation of the rear-wheel drive, and they had limitation of the drag, so sure, their brakes were phenomenal, but they had so much hampering their launch and their get up to 100 miles an hour that they were simply miles off the pace. That being said, it was a very close showdown apart from the last few vehicles. So many very close ties between the GTR Nismo and the 600 LT, the Ford GT and the J50, the list goes on. But there can be only one winner. And that winner is no surprise, the one that took every single victory except the last one, the 765 LT. I threw this in here just to illustrate how fast this car was, and I did. It made mincemeat out of every single car here, even the Viper, in its most ideal situation, a mid-speed, bumpy handling circuit, was still only within half a mile an hour. That is the speed we are talking about, the 765. Sure, it doesn't have the launch of the Aventura, but it is so fast accelerating once you get to traction that it literally doesn't matter. Any circuit, even relatively technical ones, like the lap time testing track, it just blows everything else out of the water like they're in neutral. So if we take the 765 LT out of the competition for a second, things actually close up a lot. The Aventura Svg takes second, 30 points ahead of the 911 GT2 RS. The GT2 scored third simply because of consistency. 2 podiums and a 5th place and a 6th place. Never really finishing second, however, it is still a consistent enough vehicle. Just like all Porsche. I think that's a perfect metaphor for Porsche, actually. Just focusing on the fine details to sneak a victory without any flashiness. And I kind of like that about him, not gonna lie. Then, just 2 points. Further down the road, we have the 488 Pista. Again, a good vehicle with lots of consistency, just not quite as consistent as Porsche. Again, sort of parallels real life there, I'm not gonna lie. And then we have the rest of the field. There's quite a gap. First, there's the Huracan Performante, 217 points. Then another way big gap, all the way down to 177 points. Actually, it's a tie between the Viper ACR and the Italian design. Yeah, that's a ridiculous gap, 217 to 177. You can tell which cars score on the podium and which cars were left over. And by the way, the Viper gets the 6th place instead of the 7th because it had the highest finishing position of 2nd at the speed zone. Once again, the Extreme Aero package comes into its own to break the tie. Then after that, we have the Noble M600 again, with its 2 5th place finishes, offsetting the 2 not-so-great finishes to score a nice and simple 174 points, still punching well above its weight considering it beat the GT, the C7, the ATS, and the Nissan Gtr, the vehicle that I built this challenge around, because I wanted to see how it would fare in new class supercars, and the answer is not well. We've always mocked the GTR for being a little too slow relative to its supercar rivals, and even with the newest and greatest, it's not good enough. It had the ingredients, it had the advanced technology, it had the all-wheel drive, it had a decent amount of power, but it's heavy, and I don't think Forza programs the intense computer work that is done in the GTR to make it handle so well. Because the real GTR is a masterpiece of electronic sensors basically driving the car for you. Forza doesn't simulate that, so it sort of sucks. and I was hoping the GTR Nismo from 2020 would be able to break that curse, but considering it's in 15th, beating just a Ferrari J50 and the Audi R8, that is a resounding no. To be honest, the 765 is the obvious winner here. The Aventura is the honest, traditional supercar winner, but out of all these vehicles, the winner, in my heart, definitively, unequivocally, is the Noble. The Noble is the oldest car here apart from the 917, okay? And yet, it was able to go toe-to-toe in both the speed zone and the lap time of the latest and greatest from Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini. It was a fantastic car. I was a little bit apprehensive of adding it, considering how many new vehicles are in here. The 488, the SVJ, the 675, the GTR Nismo, the 911 GT2. These are all vehicles that it has not really fought before. And it fought with flying colors. Sure, it doesn't have the outright speed required for good winner 0 to 100, but on a circuit, it can go toe-to-toe with the big guys. I really hope we get the new Noble that is being developed in the game so that we can finally retire the champion of the M600 and go face-to-face with the latest and greatest from that company, because I think that might obliterate everything. But in the meantime, the Noble has to be our winner. It's simply phenomenal how well it does despite its age and despite its apparent lack of power. Remember, it is 100 horsepower down on the SVJ and the C7, and yet it still beat the C7 quite comprehensively by about 2.5 seconds around the lap time. That says it all. But anyway, that'll be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 5. I'll be back with more